In this lesson, we're going to talk about pages 44 and 45 in the Alfred All-in-One piano book. So going back to page 44, this introduces a new chord, the F major chord, or I'll be a little more precise, the F major triad. So I'm going to explain that first. We're going to see how that specifically applies to this piece, When the Saints Go Marching In, on page 45, and then we'll proceed to learn this piece together, or I'll do it first and you'll do it wherever you are, whenever you are. So let's begin with that F major chord. So without worrying specifically about what you see on page 44, let's begin with a review of the concept of a triad. So in this case, I'm going to put my left hand fifth finger on F3, my third finger on A3, and my thumb on C4. So why is this a triad? Well, first of all, a triad has three notes, and it's a chord, a collection of tones, where each tone is arranged by skipping away from another tone. So in this case, F is a skip away from A, and A is a skip away from C. So that specifically is what a triad is. When these three pitches of the triad are arranged so that they are as close to one another as possible, so F cannot be any closer to A cannot be any closer to C, in other words, where you have a succession of skips, this is called root position. And in this case, the lowest note, F, is the root of this triad. So first, we can call this an F triad. But then, triads have a qualifier, as it were. They're called major or minor, in some cases augmented, and in some cases diminished. These are all qualifications of, or descriptions of, the types of intervals that constitute the triad. So let's get into the specifics. So from the root to the third of the chord, why is A in this case the third? Because it's a skip or a third above the root F. So this third has a quality of 4 half steps from F to this black key, which, remember from another lesson, we can call F sharp or G flat. That's an enharmonic relationship, more than one name for the same physical key. Then another half step up to G, then a half step from G to G sharp or A flat, and then from this black key to A. So as you can count, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. So a third with 4 half steps is considered a major third. That's the qualifier, a major third, or what's called the quality of this interval. Then from A up to C, it has 3 half steps. From A to this black key, 1, from this black key to the B natural, 2, and from B natural to C natural, 3. So this is called a minor third, or qualified as a minor third, because the word minor in this case just means the smaller of the two intervals in terms of the number of half steps. So F up to A, 4 half steps, major meaning big, and A to C has 3 half steps, where minor means small. So this is qualified as the smaller of the 2 thirds, and F to A is qualified as the larger of the 2 thirds. So when you have this arrangement of the root to the third being a major third, and the third to the fifth, because C is a size of 5 above F, which, recall, just means the number of letters from F up to C, as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or the number of naturals from F up to C, F, G, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when you have, again, going back to this arrangement, a major third from the root to the third, and then a minor third from the third to the fifth, this combination specifically qualifies this triad as a major triad, which is why the authors of the book are simply referring to this as an F major chord. But now, if you look carefully at the arrangement of the pitches here, you'll see that it doesn't look like F, A, and C, meaning that it's not F on the bottom, A in the middle, and C on the top, but rather C is on the bottom. So this is not a root position triad. Let me explain what this actually is. So the way the book qualifies it, it has the C, again, we're in that C3 position for the left hand. You have your fifth finger on C3, your second finger on F3, and then your thumb, which when you're in this C position is always on G. Now your thumb moves up a step to A. And so this is that same F major triad, but no longer with the root on the bottom. F is not on the bottom, but the fifth is on the bottom. That is C. Remember, bottom here just means all the way to the left, or what's called the bass, right? So C is in the bass. So this is what's called a second inversion triad. Why second inversion? Because when the root is in the bass, that's root position. When the third, that is A, is in the bass, that's first inversion. And then when the fifth, C, is in the bass, that is second inversion. And if we keep cycling, the next note to come around into the bass position will be the root again. Right? So if I move this over to my right hand, we can just simply cycle. Root position, first inversion, second inversion, back to root position, first inversion, second inversion, root position, and so on. In fact, there are a lot of exercises for developing pianists where you keep arpeggiating, as it's called, through the different positions or rotations or inversions of this triad. For example, that's one example, and you can see that I'm arpeggiating, which remember is the Italian term for breaking the block chord into a succession of pitches melodically. And that's a broken chord, right? As an example. So going back to the book so that we stay on track. The way that the authors want you to play this F major triad for the left hand is, number one, in second inversion, right? Because the fifth, C, is in the bass or on the bottom. And not only that, but we can also refer to this as an F major chord over C. Now, I want you to remember, when we were learning about that G7 chord, which you now are very familiar with, remember B in the bass, up to F and G, I had been referring to this as a G7 chord over B. And recall that this is also a first inversion tetrachord because the four notes that constitute this entity, G, B, D, and F, remember the D is omitted, but that's okay, that's actually allowable. So the three notes that we're worried about here are G, B, and F. Well, G is the root, B is the third, the missing D is the fifth, and F is the seventh, because it's a G7 chord. And remember that all of these numbers, third, fifth, and seventh, just apply to the interval size of that note with respect to the root. So B is a third above G, D is a fifth above G, and F is a seventh above G. And so the reason this is a first inversion tetrachord is because, number one, there are four notes, thus tetrachord, or a seventh chord because it has that F, the seventh above the root, and because the third is on the bottom. And that's why it's called a first inversion tetrachord or first inversion seventh chord. So actually, with these three chords that you now know, specifically C major, G7 over B, and F major over C, you now know three chords in three different rotations. The C major triad, because it's arranged as all skips, is in root position because the C, its root, is in the bass. The G7 chord, as I've explained pretty thoroughly, and I think you're probably tired of hearing me talk about this, but the G7 chord is in first inversion because its third, the B, is in the bass. And now with the newest chord, the F major triad, its fifth, or the note C, is in the bass. So this is a second inversion chord, or F major over C. And then we can come right back to C if we want. And these three chords give us a lot of mileage as far as just playing really interesting music, but even a lot of pop music generally, and this is a very generic, reductive remark, is kind of based around those three chords. For example, I could play C major, I could go down to a G major triad or seventh chord, I could go down to an F major chord, and then continue and resolve to a C major chord. I mean, think about all the music that kind of has this sound. Again, remember, I'm being very reductive. I'm not being at all critical of pop music. In fact, sometimes having fewer elements, like fewer harmonies, is actually a good thing because it keeps the music more memorable, it's less complicated, it's more singable, if anything, or just more playable. So something like this is really quite beautiful and carries a lot of power, expressive and I think otherwise, in a lot of popular music. And it's popular for a good reason, right? And that's one of those reasons, I believe. But let's get back into the book without my digressing too much or editorializing. So before we leave page 44, let's just take a look at the bottom of this page and just play this progression really carefully. So according to the chord symbols, we start with a C major triad. We move over to this F major chord, or F major over C, or second inversion F major triad, you get it, and then back to C. So here's what that looks like specifically. So we begin with our C major triad, fifth finger on C3, third finger on E, first finger on G. Then we lift slightly and we move over to the new chord, the F major over C chord. So your fifth finger, stays on C, second finger is on F, and your thumb is on A. So you see the thumb, which is always on G so far, and I mentioned this several minutes ago, now it moves up to A, and that's the F major chord, and then you lift slightly, and your fifth finger stays where it is, right, on C, but the thumb moves down to G, and now your second finger comes off of F, and your third finger returns to E. So really listen carefully to the sound of these chords before you play them so that when you do play them, you don't make any mistakes. C major triad, F major over C, back to C major. Now let's play them as the exercise requests us to do. So 4 beats per chord, because we're in a 4/4 time signature, we have whole notes, and then when we get to the end of these 3 measures, we've got the repeat sign with those double dots, and we play it all over again. So let's do that. So I'm going to count the first time, and then when I repeat, I will not. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, again. Now, were you able to sense the consistency of that beat when I was no longer singing over it? Right? There was that pulse that hopefully you remembered and internalized, and that's really what I'm going for. That all this counting is, of course, very helpful, but at some point, I want you to internalize that pulse. So you don't even see me snapping anymore, but you just hear that 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3. You hear it internally as opposed to externally. You'll just be able to play a lot more evenly once that process takes hold. All right, we are ready to take a look at page 45, When the Saints Go Marching In. So there are a couple of new things on this page. We talked about the arguably the most difficult, which is that new F major triad. There's the chord symbol for it. Everything else in terms of the harmonies or the chords is familiar. The C major triad, the G7 tetrachord, and then of course the F chord. That part you know. But the biggest new thing other than that is in this box, the incomplete measure. So let's talk about that. Let's observe, first of all, that the time signature here is 4/4. And you know perfectly well what that means. We have 4 beats, that's the top number, and the bottom number tells you the rhythmic value of the beat. So in this case, 4 is a numerical stand-in for the quarter note. So there are 4 quarter notes per measure. Okay, this is an example of what's called quadruple meter, right? Where there are 4 beats to 1 metric cycle. But you don't necessarily need to worry about metric cycles. You just want to know how many beats there are in the measure, and the answer is 4. So the reason I'm kind of talking about this so much is because look at the very first measure here, and how many quarter notes or beats do you see? Well, 1, 2, 3. And that's it. So clearly 1 beat is missing. The question is, where is that missing beat? That's one question. The second question is, which beat is missing? The first beat or some other beat? Well, let's take a look. So if we go all the way down to the bottom of the page, you can see that the very last measure is also incomplete. In fact, it only has 1 beat. Now, this is the first beat that appears, so this is beat number 1, or, if you remember from other lessons, what's called the downbeat. So this is the downbeat of a measure that has 3 additional beats. The question is, where are those 3 beats? Well, they're actually in the beginning. So you see how these double dots indicate a repeat. So that means we have to go all the way back to the beginning, and without any break in the tempo, right, the rate of the beat, we go from this downbeat, or beat number 1, and continue straight away into beats 2, 3, 4, and then continue on with the piece. And when we're done, we just have 1 beat to play at the very end. So let me demonstrate that, and not the whole thing, but just from this second to last or penultimate measure, and I'll play from here through this downbeat, and then repeat without any breaks, and play the first couple of measures in this first system. Okay, so I'm going to start right there, even though we haven't learned it, but you've already become somewhat familiar with this notation. You know, for example, that that's a whole note on C4, tied over to a quarter note. You know that this is a quarter rest, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4 iterations of the C major triad in the left hand. And then, as we continue back to the beginning, you see that this is C4, we skip up, again, it's treble clef in the right hand, we skip up to E4, then we step up to F, and then we step again up to the next downbeat or first beat, and this is G4 with finger number 5. So you're familiar with that. So again, I'm going to start right there and continue for a bit in the first system, just so you can hear that continuity. So here we go, starting from that whole note on C. So 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and so on. Okay, so I'm not going to take time to do that because we're going to play that and learn how to play that together. So that's what the end sounds like, and you can see how the end basically wraps around back to the beginning. So that's one new thing about the incomplete measure. It's completely normal. The question is, how do you begin the piece, right? The very, very first time that you play it. Well, what you do is you can count a completely empty measure of 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. But remember, when you get to the downbeat that's missing here, it is there, but you don't start playing there the first time around. You just count 1, and then you continue playing. So to start this piece, you could go 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and so on. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm always going to give you that complete empty measure with the preparatory beats, then the missing downbeat, and then we'll start here with beat number 2. Okay, so that explains the incomplete measures. Let's go through this piece and learn how to play it. Now, in other examples where the music has been somewhat complicated, for example, on page 37, if I can get to it fairly quickly, on page 37 with Mary Ann. If you go back to that lesson, you'll see that I didn't actually learn Mary Ann from beginning to end, as it were, from left to right and top to bottom. Instead, we tackled the very end of each system and then gradually worked backwards, because sometimes you have to start with the hardest material and then work backward to the easiest material. Why start with the hard stuff? Because you're freshest, because it takes longer to learn the harder stuff, and then you have more time to actually process it as you continue practicing the piece and learning it. So on page 45, with When the Saints, there's no reason to begin at the very beginning and just learn measure by measure until we get to the end. It's a better strategy to begin with the harder stuff and then gradually assemble the bits and pieces into a comprehensive performance. So the question is, how do you know what the hardest stuff is? Well, that's why I'm here. So of course this is somewhat subjective. It's based on my experience and opinion, but you're here for a reason, so hopefully you trust my opinion. As far as I'm concerned, one of the hardest parts is this measure at the end of system number 3 and the first measure of system number 4. Hard because you have to sustain this F, right, first bass, treble clef. You have to sustain this F4 for 3 full beats. That's the dotted half note, tied, remember that's a rhythmic extension, tied to a half note. All the while you play this new F major triad, F over C, in the left hand, hold, and then continue with the final phrase, When the Saints, etc., while the left hand lifts. There's just a lot of coordination going on here. So let's work on these 2 measures, and then we'll start going to some other material and then gradually assemble the piece. So let's begin with the right hand. So this is G4 with finger number 5. This is F4 with finger number 4. Over here in the next measure, you play E4 with finger 3 as indicated, and then up a step to F4, and then of course up to G4. In fact, I'm actually going to go all the way back to G because we start there. Okay, so let's work through these rhythms. And the first thing I want to do, and this is fairly straightforward, and you've seen me do this, you've heard me do this in other lessons, is I'm going to speak these letters in time. So let's provide a count. So 1, 2, ready, and G, F, E, F, G. Okay, I know it's funny. It's funny to me every time because I'm going for that F, but you understand that I was holding this for 3 beats in this measure and then 2 additional beats there. Let me do that one more time with the snapping. All right, so 1, 2, ready, and G, F, E, F, G, and so on. All right, let's play it. So you start with your 5th finger on G4, then you step down to F4, you hold it, as you know, for a total of 5 beats, and then you go down to E4, and then back up to F4, and then back to the downbeat of the second measure of system number 4, where it says Saints, and you hold that for 2 beats, etc. So let's play that in time. So 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. All right, let's do that one more time just to really be confident about that. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, so that's the right hand. Now the left hand, as you can see, begins in this measure after the half rest. Remember, that's that little black bar sitting on top of line number 3. Beats 3 and 4 play the F major chord. You know that because you recognize the notation, but also because of the chord symbol. And then there's a half note here on the downbeat of this measure, which holds out for 2 beats, followed by a half rest again. So let's play the left hand of these 2 measures by itself. Okay, so remember the chord, 5th finger on C3, 2nd finger on F3, and 1st finger on A3. Now don't play it like I did, which is a broken chord, played harmonically all at the same time as a block chord. Okay, so here we go. Remember how the count goes. You have 2 beats of rest, 1, 2, then you play on beats 3 and 4. Then the next downbeat is held as a half note, 1, 2, rest, rest, right, for that final half rest in the second measure. So I'm going to give you the preliminary beats. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, preliminary beats just meaning 1 complete measure of rest. Then we begin this final measure, and I'm counting 1, 2 for this rest. Let's do that one more time. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, do you feel pretty good about that? Let's try both hands out. So from where it says number, and then parenthetically, yes, I do, and then when the saints. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, let's do that one more time. So remember, I'm playing the last 2 measures of, well, the last measure of system 3, the first measure of system 4, and then I just go on just a little bit for context. Let's do that one more time. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so that's arguably one of the hardest spots in the entire piece, but that's entirely out of context. So even if you have no trouble playing what I just did, we still have to connect it to what comes before and what follows it. So let's do that. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of system number 3. And this, in fact, is another tricky spot that over the years I found my students to have difficulty with, even though it's a very simple thing to avoid, but, well, sometimes you just have to say it out loud. So this is the simple thing that we must avoid. As you can see here, on beat number 2 of this first measure of system 3, there is a quarter rest. Don't forget to take this quarter rest. It's really vital. So we're going to contextualize this rest with the material that concludes system number 2, but right now, for the purposes of this next part in our learning process, I'm going to begin right there with how I want on beat number 3 of this measure. So when I count this, I'll count 1, 2, and that's where we're going to begin. So let's work this out. What are the notes here? This is, again, treble clef. This is E4, finger number 3, down to D, finger number 2, then C4, finger number 1. As a half note, it repeats. There's that unison, finger number 1 again. We skip up to E, finger number 3. We skip up again to G, finger number 5. And the rest you know, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, because we worked on this just now. So let's map out or block out this right hand first. So right hand in the C4 position. Remember, we're starting with how I. So let's block it out first, including those 2 measures where it says number, yes I do, when the saints, those final measures that we were working on previously. So going back to the beginning of system 3, you begin with a 3rd finger on E, step down to 2 on D, then 1 on C. That's a half note that repeats, so you have to lift and come down again on 1. Play up to E or skip up to E on finger number 3. Skip up to G on finger number 5. Now when it comes to number, you start with G again, so lift slightly, fifth finger on G, fourth finger down to F, and then at the beginning of system number 4, where it says when the, you play third finger on E, fourth finger on F, and fifth finger on G for those saints. Okay, so let's put this into a time or into a timed performance. So starting from the beginning of system number 3 on beat number 3, where it says how I want, we're going to play how I want to join that number when the saints. Okay, all in the right hand. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and so on. Let's do that one more time, slightly faster, which might be a challenge, but that's a good thing, right? You want to challenge yourself, especially at the beginning, because it forces you to concentrate. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay, now let's add the left hand where we already know it, specifically with that F major chord at the end of system number 3 and the beginning of system number 4. So I'm going to play the right hand part from how I want until number, then add the left hand, and then of course continue a bit with the right hand with when the saints. Okay, so here we go, counting the entire time. Prepare your left hand for that F major chord, fifth finger on C, second finger on F, and thumb or first finger on A. Okay, so from how I. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. So hopefully that was fairly straightforward. Now the hard part is adding the rest of the left hand part. So here in measures 2 and 3 of the third system, we have to play that C major triad. Now we know it, we just have to make sure that we coordinate the fact that the right hand is holding out these half notes and the left hand comes in only on beats number 2 and 4. 2 and 4, right? With these rests in between. So let's try just this one measure, and then we're going to separate and play this measure. So measure number 2. The right hand plays 2 half notes on middle C, 1, 2, 3, 4. The left hand comes in between, but the right hand stays down. So careful that this doesn't happen. Do you remember the end of Brother John? Right, that was on page 33. You remember that? Well, this is not that gesture of down, 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 and when something comes down, the other hand comes up. This is a little different. The right hand stays down, the left hand plays, then the right hand comes down again on C, and the left hand comes up, and then the left hand comes down again. Okay, so obviously that's out of time. Let's tighten that up again. So 1, tighten that up again. I just misspoke in a really strange way. Let's tighten that up. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, those of you who are really astute and looking at this carefully might say, wait a second, you just lifted your right hand on beat number 2, so you did do this. Well, not intentionally. The thing is, remember that if we have a unison, as we do, you have to lift to get to the next articulation or reiteration of the same note. So if I stay down, I won't end up repeating the unison. I'll just end up playing this as a whole note. 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's not the way that this is meant to be played. So you have to lift, and it may look like you're going in alternation, but that's not really what's happening here. So the same thing again, measure 2 of system 3. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. let's move on to the next measure. That's measure 3 of system 3, and it's the same rhythm, half notes in the right hand, and then rests on beats 1 and 3 in the left, and the same C major chord on beats 2 and 4, and the same rhythmic articulation as in this measure. So right hand plays 3 on E, skips up to 5 on G, and the left hand basically articulates or inserts itself in between. So that's what this sounds like. 1, 2, ready, and. See, this is easier because you no longer have to worry about that unison, right? You just play 1, 2, 3, 4. Again with the left hand, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. Be sure you're really precise with those rests. You're taking your hand off the keyboard. Let's play those two measures back to back without any rest. These two measures. Here's what it sounds like. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully it's going well. Let's go back and add the how I on beats 3 and 4 of this measure, and let's play all the way through until we hit number. So just this much. Okay, so I'm going to count 1, 2, and then I'll come in. So prepare your hands in the C position, C4 here, C3 there position. You're going to start the right hand with E on finger number 3. You've already arranged your fingers to prepare yourself in the left hand to play the C major triad, 5, 3, 1. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now while you're still fresh with this, continue into the next two measures and play number, yes I do, when the, with both hands. Ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, and now let's try combining those. And so I'm going to start here with how I, and I'll play all the way through this downbeat where it says Saints, and you play your fifth finger on G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Now, think strategically. Why is there this half rest there? It's so that you have time to lift your left hand and get it positioned into this F major triad. So it's really important that you learn how to shift from C to F. So speaking of that, go back to the very top of the page. Now, I haven't done this yet, but what we should do right now is a sort of break from this very concentrated assembling of the parts is to play this warm-up exercise. So here you can see that you play 4 iterations of C, you switch over to 4 of G7, all quarters of course, then back to C, then on to F, and then back to C as a whole note, and then you repeat again. So let's take an intermission, as it were, from When the Saints, and play this opening. And play it mezzo forte, why not? This is all in the left hand. So let's do that together. So you're going to start with C 4 times, switch over to G7, remember B, F, G from the bottom to the top, big friendly giant. You go back to C, you switch to that F chord, and then back to C. Now, of course, I wasn't actually playing that warm-up exercise, I was just blocking out the chord changes, so I know where my hand has to go. Let's do it as written. So 4 quarters for the first 4 measures, and then a whole note at the end, and then we'll repeat. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, repeat. 1, 2. Release. I stopped counting intentionally so that, first of all, you could hear it without my voiceover, and secondly, so that you could internalize that pulse, which is so fundamental, as I explained earlier in this lesson. You are welcome to follow these instructions. Practice slowly at first, then gradually increase speed. By all means, let's try that a little bit faster. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, even faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Up to you. Again, my recommendation is if you cannot play this quickly yet, first of all, don't panic. You'll get there, or don't fret. Maybe you're not taking this quite as deeply. No one's panicking, but just calmly do this until you start feeling more comfortable with those changes. C to G7, back to C, onto F, back to C, right? You don't even have to play to get comfortable with those hand positions. So keep practicing until you gain, again, the physical acumen to be able to do so, and then you will be able to get faster. But my recommendation is don't force it, because if anything, you will learn it incorrectly, and then you'll have to relearn it the right way, which is just a waste of time if you can do it correctly the first time. Or so I hear. All right, so let's go back to what we were doing, which is working on System 3 into the beginning of System 4. So one more time before we add some new stuff, I'm going to start from How I and play up until Saints with both hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, now remember that our job here was to take our focus for this particular segment of the piece, which were these two measures, and then connect to what was happening before and to what follows. So we're in good shape with what happened before. Now let's play from When the Saints all the way until the end. Okay, so let's map out first of all what's happening in the right hand. So here we have, again, this pretty common pattern of the last two beats being utilized after a half note, or at least something happening in the first half of the measure. So this is finger number 3, obviously on E, up a step to F, up a step to G. We skip down to finger 3 on E, we step down to finger 2 on D, a unison repetition, D again, and then we step down to C4, and as we already worked out the ending, this part we actually know, this is C4 tied to, again, another C4, as all ties must function. You have to tie to the same note because it's just an extension of duration. It's a rhythmic extension. And then meanwhile, of course, the left hand plays the C major chord here. It plays the C major chord here in the same pattern as you saw there, half notes with these quarter kind of insertions on beats 2 and 4, with beats 1 and 3 as quarter rests. And then the same thing happening in this measure rhythmically, but now with a G7 articulation. So let's start by walking through the right hand. Okay, so When the Saints Go Marching In at the end, finger 3 on E, up to finger 4 on F, up to finger 5 on G, skipping down to E on 3, stepping down to 2 on D, a unison repetition, so lift slightly and come back down, and a step down to C4. And you're going to hold this as a whole note tied to a quarter, which is 5 total beats. All right, so let's try this in time. I'm going to count from the beginning of system number 4, so 1, 2, and then I'll come in right there on beat number 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, release. Now I know there's a repeat sign, and I know that we have to go back to the beginning, but just for now, let's isolate this last system. So one more time for the same thing in the right hand from When the Saints Go Marching In at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, Now let's try adding that left hand. So what we can do is what we had done earlier with these two measures. I'm going to play just this second measure by itself, and then this third measure again in isolation, so that we get used to the patterns, and then we'll play these last two measures like I did at the very beginning when I was working through explaining incomplete measures here and there. So let's start with measure number 2. So left hand is in that C position, playing the C major triad, 5-3-1. Right hand on G first, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that a little bit faster. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Do it one more time for practice. Ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's move on to the next measure where it says marching, and that's the G7 chord. So remember, you've practiced that transition, and so your left hand goes over to B, F, G. Remember that your fifth finger, your pinky, must move down a half step to B, from C3 to B2, your second finger on F, your thumb on G. Okay, so here's measure number 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's do that a bit faster. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, ready, and. And now let's connect those two measures. So these specifically, measures 2 and 3. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, if you're having any trouble with those half notes staying down while the left hand has to come up with the quarters, remember from a previous lesson what you can do. Drop the fall board. Don't worry about the keyboard underneath at all, and just physically go through these motions. Half note, quarter, half note, quarter, half note, quarter, half note, quarter. I mean, you can do this really for all the pieces, for any part. Like you could play, for example, oh, I don't know, What Can I Share, right? Back on page 42, just to reference another lesson. I mean, you could conceivably play this piece entirely on the fall board, as in right, that's the first two systems. You could play Jingle Bells on page 30. Remember how that goes? And what's interesting is that I bet that had I not said anything, you still would have been able to recognize what piece I'm playing because of the rhythm. For example, let's test this theory out. Now, of course, I won't know if I'm correct because I won't hear you, but my experience tells me I'm onto something with this. What piece am I playing right now? Brother John, right? At least you recognize that N that I referenced earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I'm digressing. I'm just having a little bit too much fun here. I know you want to get back to playing page 45. So let's go back to what we were doing, which is playing these two measures. So I'm going to do that one more time and then connect back to the beginning of this phrase, when the. So here are measures 2 and 3 with both hands. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now let's connect back to the beginning where it says when the. So remember, this is third finger on E, fourth finger on F, and then we continue where we had been. So let's all do that in time. 1, 2. It all sounds like it's just hanging in the air because I haven't played the last two measures. So remember, we come down, let's just play this by itself. So we come down to the thumb, right hand on C4, and then the 4 repetitions of the C major triad on beats 2, 3, 4, and the next downbeat. Okay, so in time, the last 2 measures with both hands, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, rest. All right, let's try the entire final system with both hands from When the Saints through this incomplete measures downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, release. Let's do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Well, again, that's all well and good by itself, but now we have to connect this back to that chord that we had started with, number, yes I do, when the. Now remember that when we had worked on these 2 measures, I was always playing up to this downbeat on Saints. There was a reason for that, so that if we now start from here, we'll get the overlap of that first segment and this newest segment from When the Saints to the end, so that these 3 notes are already practiced. So that's really crucial. When you learn to divide a piece, to parse it into segments, make sure that the segments overlap so that when you assemble them, there's that bridge that's already part of your practice strategy built in to how you were learning the segments to begin with. So I'm going to play from number all the way to the end. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, rest. I'm going to do that one more time without the counting over. 1, 2, ready, and. Now we're not done yet, because now we have to go all the way back to the beginning of the 3rd system with How I, and play from here all the way to the end. So let's try it. I'm going to count 1, 2, and then I'll start right there on beat number 3 with How I. Last 2 systems. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, release. Let's do that one more time without me counting over it, so you can just hear the music as it's supposed to be without anyone singing, or at least without anyone singing numbers the way I'm doing. 1, 2. Okay, so far you're probably feeling pretty confident that we're basically done with this piece, and the truth is we have just a little bit more to go, but I want to remind you of the other potentially difficult spot, surprisingly so, because it seems so innocuous or inconspicuous, this quarter rest right there. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start here, last measure of system 2, and play through the downbeat of measure 2 of this 3rd system. So let's begin with the right hand. So of course this is a whole note on D, 2nd finger, tied over to a quarter. You should see that as something pretty familiar, because that's happening all throughout this piece. Whole notes tied to quarters. Whole tied to a quarter. Whole tied to a quarter. Obviously this one, whole tied to a quarter, and look at this ending. Whole tied to a quarter, and that's a total of 5 beats. By the way, just like this dotted half note with 3 beats tied over to this half note with 2 beats. Again, 5 beats total. Just an interesting observation about this piece. So let's begin right there, and we're going to play this D tied over to this quarter, take the rest on beat number 2, and then play E, D, C. That's it. Okay, here we go. Last measure of system 2, you play the D, you sustain it for a while, then you rest, and then you play 3, 2, and then 1 on C. Okay, so those are the pitches that we block out. Now let me count this and play. So I'm going to give you a preparatory measure, 1, 2, ready, and we'll play this measure through this downbeat. Here we go. Second finger on D. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, rest. 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, let's do that one more time just so you can really specifically identify that rest. Which rest? The one on beat number 2 of this first measure of system 3. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and so on. Let's add the left hand. The left hand plays these 1, 2, 3, 4 iterations of the G7 chord. Again, you recognize this by the chord symbol and of course by the notation. So let's add those to it. So here's what happens in these 2 measures. The right hand plays D and sustains. The left hand comes in on G7, plays it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, rest. Okay, now I'm recording this sort of late in the afternoon, so you'll excuse me. I'm going to get some more light here. Ah, so much better, right? It's that late afternoon sun. So I apologize if I'm a bit in shadow here on the keyboard, but let's try that again. So I'm playing the last measure of system 2, the first measure of system 3 with both hands in time. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, rest. 3, 4, 1, 2, and so on. Okay, so if you feel pretty good about this spot, let's play from here all the way through to the end, right? You see how we're building longer and longer segments, assembling them together. So from here, remember that rest, and then we'll continue. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, In fact, we've really played all the patterns that matter in this piece because everything in the beginning is already old hand for us because we've learned the harder material in systems 3 and 4. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. We know that we're of course beginning on beat number 2 because of this incomplete measure. We recognize this set of rhythms of the 3 quarters, the whole note tied to a quarter, the same repetition, 3 quarters, starting on beat number 2, the whole note tied to a quarter. So let's worry about system number 1 first. Now let's start with the right hand. The authors of the book give us the fingering, so 1 on C4, skipping up to 3 on E, a step up to F with finger number 4, and then 5 on G. And so you repeat this pattern, and you do it twice. So let's just make sure we can do the rhythms correctly, all right? So we begin with beat number 2. When we get to the G, you hold it for 4 complete beats, then the next downbeat, which is tied over, and then you repeat the pattern one more time with the same set of rhythms. So it sounds like this. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so we just keep cycling those rhythms over and over again. And inside, we have the C major triad repeated 4 times on beats 2, 3, and 4, and then the following downbeat while the G sustains. And that pattern repeats here as well, with this G sustaining and the C major chord being played through. So let's try that. This is the first system up through the downbeat of system number 2. Both hands. Remember your C major chord, 5, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. Let me play that one more time without any counting over it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. We are so close. We have these 3 measures to learn and everything else we've already done. So the rest is just putting it together. So first of all, do you recognize this? 1, 3, 4, 5, or C, E, F, G. Same thing we did there, so we actually know this. These sets of half notes are rhythmically identical to what happens here as well as here. So we are on common ground by this point, especially because the left hand keeps inserting itself in this system on beats 2 and 4 on that C major triad, the same way that we saw in this system as well as in this system. Of course, there's a G7 chord there, but the rhythm, the pattern is very, very similar. So let's play these 2 measures only. So you recognize that 5 on G skips down to 3 on E. It continues skipping down to 1 on C, and then skips right back up to 3 on E. So since we're so experienced playing these measures, let's just play these 2 in a group instead of breaking them up in isolation. So here's what this sounds like. This is measures 2 and 3 of system number 2, where it says Saints Go Marching. So 5th finger on G, left hand comes in. Down to 3rd finger on E, down to 1st finger on C, back up to the 3rd finger on E. Okay, so let's play that in time. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and now we just have to add oh, when, the. So I'm going to count 1, and then we're going to start right there on beat 2. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're almost there. So we've learned this. Now let's connect it to these following 2 measures from the D whole note tied over to a quarter, with those G7 chords articulating in at the end of system 2 and the beginning of system 1. So I'm going to play from here through the downbeat of this measure. Okay, so here we go. So from Oh When the Saints at the beginning of system 2 through How I Want at the beginning of system 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 1. Okay, that's it. We've played through all the material of this piece. Now let's assemble it. So my recommendation is go back to the beginning and play through the first 2 systems up until How I Want. So let's do that. Then we're going to start from How I Want. Remember, overlaps are important, and go all the way through to the end of system 4. And meanwhile, I'll turn on a light because it's getting dark. That's what happens when you rely on natural light, correct? I'll even turn on more than one light. How about that? This way so you can see me clearly, or rather see the keyboard clearly. So from the beginning through How I Want at the beginning of system number 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. Rest. Okay, now without taking too much time, start right from how I want, and let's go all the way through to the end. I'm going to count these opening 2 beats, 1, 2, and then begin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right. Now that you've assembled these two systems and these two systems, let's try playing from the beginning to the end once. And what I'm going to do, just to encourage you to really take these repeats seriously, is I'll play from the beginning. When I get to the end, I'll loop back around and play it a second time. The first time I will count, as I want to do, and then the second time I won't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, Okay, that was When the Saints Go Marching In, repeated as required. And again, please remember that when you get to this final incomplete measure, there's no break as it wraps right back around to the beginning. So that is When the Saints Go Marching In on page 45.